I have no idea how to create a lesson plan. I said this to myself so many times at the beginning of my career as an English language teacher, and no doubt many of you who are clicking on this video have had a similar feeling. So in this video, my purpose is to set out what you need to include in a lesson plan to give you that sense that you are confident going into your lesson, that you're going to meet the standards. Whether you're taking a CELTA course or any kind of TEFL course, this video is going to lay out what you need to include in your lesson plan. Hi, my name is Fergus Fadden, and for about 2 decades now, I have been a CELTA teacher, trainer, a TEFL teacher, trainer, a coach, and a business owner. And the purpose of this channel is to create videos to help you transform into the teacher you want to be for your students. So to get into it today, one of the concepts that I came across when I was doing a bit of research, just to make sure that I was up to date, is an idea called backward design. And this really lines up with everything that goes into a good lesson plan. What backward design really says is establish what are the standards that you are going to evaluate the success of your lesson. More often than not, those values are going to be down to things that the students actually do in the lesson. So this brings me to the first point from which we are going to design our lesson backwards, and that is the aim of the lesson. And you might say, well, no, that's the first thing that you do. And it is. However, look at the wording that I'm going to suggest that you always use. You're going to say, by the end of the lesson, students will have. Start every aim with those words. By the end of the lesson, students will have, and then complete it with a verb. Students will have practiced. Students will have read. Students will have written. As long as you follow it up in that sense, then you are going to give yourself a point at which you can work backwards from. Really, from a kind of grammar teacher nerd point of view, this grammar is called the future perfect simple, and that's exactly how it works. The future perfect simple really is identifying a point in the future and something will be true between the present and that point in the future. So it's perfect grammar for our lesson aim. Another huge component that is often missing, and I often give feedback to trainees on this, is the context. You must include that in your lesson name. So by the end of the lesson, students will have practiced the present perfect in the context of life experiences. Perfect. We have a simple, clear aim. Now I can look at that aim, I can get to the end of your lesson and ask myself, have the students practiced the present perfect in the context of life experiences? If those things have happened, then I can say that the lesson is a success. However, of course, there is more to a lesson plan than that. The next thing that you really want to include are your personal aims, your developmental aims as a teacher. Now, my strong advice on this is twofold. First of all, pull those aims from the feedback you've received on previous lessons from your tutor. If you're doing a CELTA course, look at the feedback you got from your first teaching practice and then turn those into personal aims for your second teaching practice. Look at the feedback you have from your second teaching practice and make those the personal aims for your third teaching practice, and so on and so forth. Now, if you can identify many personal aims, 5, 6, 7, again, my advice would be cut that down to 2 or 3 personal aims. Why do I say that? If you're trying to achieve too many things at the same time, you'll end up kind of taking this jack of all trades, master of none when it comes to your own development. Now, of course, there may be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 20 things to develop. I know I certainly look at myself and still to this day, there are many things that I need to develop. However, just make it achievable for yourself. So give yourself 1 or 2, 3 maximum per lesson. This is going to give you much more opportunity to achieve those. And once you have achieved on those personal aims, then move on to the other ones in your list. Rome wasn't built in a day. The next big component of a successful TEFL, CELTA, any kind of language teaching, and indeed any teaching lesson plan will be your language analysis. Okay, what goes into the language analysis? Well, you need to decide what type of lesson are you teaching. Are you teaching a vocabulary lesson? Well, you're going to need to analyze every word or phrase that you're teaching in that vocabulary lesson for meaning, form, pronunciation. Are you teaching a grammar lesson? In that case, you're going to need to decide, first of all, are you teaching the affirmative, negative, and question form, or just the affirmative, or what forms are you teaching? And then you're going to do meaning, form, and pronunciation of those forms. Now, there are more components to a solid language analysis. Of course, you're going to need to anticipate problems that your students might have with the language. And usually those problems are going to be solved through clarifying the meaning, form, pronunciation, whatever technique you choose to use to do that, whether it be an image, your whiteboard, listening, gestures, etc. Often, though, you're going to have a solution for students' problems by asking concept checking questions. So your concept checking questions are often going to go into your language analysis. Another thing to say about language analysis, if you're doing a skills lesson, so reading, writing, speaking, or listening, you're not going to need to do as detailed a language analysis. Why? Because it's not a language systems lesson. It's not a grammar, vocabulary, functional language lesson. Your lesson is focused on skills. So the vocabulary that you're doing there is really just pre-teaching. It's removing blocking items. So you just need to be ready to teach. Your students are not going to do practice on it, for example. So you don't need to do as detailed language analysis. So I mentioned anticipating problems and solutions. So this does not just have to do with language, but it also has to do with classroom management. So another strong component of a lesson plan that really works is your problems and solutions section. So things that you might consider when it comes to anticipating these kinds of problems, instructions might be complex. If instructions are complex, solution. Break them down into pieces, ask instruction checking questions, do a demo. Another problem might be I'll run out of time, or time management has been a problem. Now this is kind of straddling anticipated problems and solutions and personal aims. But say that that's your anticipated problem, that you might run out of time. Well, a solution could be to include an ITA, if time allows activity. And this is going to be an activity that you can decide on the fly, do I need to do it? Yes, if I have time. If I don't have time, it's not going to interfere with the achievement of my lesson aim. And speaking of time allocation, time management is a big component when it comes to an effective lesson plan. Often I see trainee teachers are trying to cram as much as they possibly can into the 1 hour they have to teach their lesson, for example, and they end up coming up with time allocations that are very kind of piecemeal, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. My strong advice when it comes to time management is to have less activities, but more time to do it. I guarantee you, by the time you give instructions, you check those instructions. Students do it individually, students do it in pairs, and you compare as a whole group. It's going to take much more than the 2 or 3 minutes that you allocate for the lesson. So you might think, well, Fergus, I have to get all of these things done and there's only so much time. Well, no, maybe you need to go back to your aim and you need to modulate your aim to make it smaller or more compact so that you can go back to the activities that you've decided to do in your lesson and give more time to your students to do it. It may sound like a cliche, but it's so true when it comes to lesson planning. Less is more. Less activities allows for more time to do the activities, allows for more thinking time for your students, allows for more questions, and you as a teacher to get in there and have those interventions or those teachable moments that we're all looking for. That's really our role after all. Our role is not just to be an administrator of activities and to facilitate the students to get in there and do all the work themselves. No, we're supposed to be subject matter experts as well, and we're supposed to be able to respond to students' needs as they emerge in the lesson. If we are really constrained for time, we're not going to give ourselves the opportunity to do that, and you're going to leave frustrated, feeling, why was that not so successful? Your students are going to feel a little bit shortchanged and they'll want more, or maybe they'll come to you at the end of the lesson and take up 10 or 15 minutes of your time when the lesson is over, having this private lesson where they're asking you a bunch of questions. So plan for less activities, but more time to do them. I guarantee you the time is just going to go by just like that. And you may think, oh my goodness, I have an hour, I'm never going to fill it up. I only have these few activities planned. You will fill them up. And if you're worried about that, again, go back to the if time allows. Have some extra activities, 1-2 extra activities at each stage of your lesson, especially if you're doing a language systems lesson like a vocabulary or a grammar lesson. You can have an extra controlled practice or an extra free practice to provide more practice for your students if indeed you have time. And lastly, the actual procedure of your lesson, the various stages of your lesson. Each stage, you should think about how are you going to include the context that you've mentioned in your overall lesson aim. So at every stage, ask yourself, how am I going to get the context in there? Why? This is going to help the lesson stay communicative. It's going to help your students feel like this is a overall flow of a lesson rather than various just stages, just a bunch of activities that they're being asked to do. Also, it's going to help students relate the meaning and understand where the language that you are teaching them relates to their lives, how they're going to use it in the real world. So make sure to get your context in there. The second part, and closely related, is ask yourself, what is the aim of each stage you're doing? And that aim of each stage should contribute to the overall aim of your lesson. For example, your first stage of your lesson is often called the lead-in. The aim of a lead-in is to establish the context and to engage your students. That's what you're doing. Okay, that does contribute to my overall aim of my lesson because I'm establishing the context. I mentioned the context in the overall aim, and I'm engaging my students. Well, I said as well, by the end of the lesson, students will have. So I'm talking about what they're going to do, so I'm engaging them. So both those components contribute to the overall aim of the lesson. So let me know down in the comments, what are your top tips when it comes to lesson planning? Did you struggle with anything? Are you struggling with anything when it comes to lesson planning? Check out in the description, there is a link which will take you to my website where I offer help pre and during and post CELTA and TEFL courses. Okay, thank you so much for watching. All that's left for me to say is bye for now, and I'll see you in the next one.